Council President Joe LaCava is here to talk with us about this morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the most important thing happening down at City Hall right now.
What was your gut reaction when you saw the mayor's budget proposal?
Well, we had given a preview. We had recognized as much as last fall that a lot of that one-time funding that helps carry us through that structural deficit, that lack of revenue was not going to be there for the upcoming year. And so we knew there were going to be cuts across the board. We were hoping they'd be strategic. We thought they'd be balanced across the city of San Diego. But I certainly wasn't surprised. A lot of conversation over the next 2 months to get to that balanced budget. I know my council members will weigh in. I know the public's going to weigh in. But this is a very hard conversation, and nobody's going to walk away happy.
Based on what you've seen so far, are they strategic cuts?
I think the mayor has done a better job. The operations side has really taken a deep dive to say we've got to make sure that we get to a balanced budget. And how does this impact every neighborhood, every business, every member of the public, every resident going forward? I think there's a lot to talk about. But at the end of the day, we got to balance that budget, and there is no new ways to cut this pie up. So I think it's difficult, it's painful, but it's the right thing to do from my initial reaction. I've got a lot more work to do to dive into the deeper ends of that budget.
How do you go about cutting city services and programs while promising to make life more affordable for San Diegans?
I think that's where it gets really painful, that this is not just about City Hall and how do we deliver the services that our residents and businesses expect, but we're here in an era where you have the increasing cost of living, and then you have the uncertainty created by the decisions that are being made in D.C., how that's going to impact us in so many different ways, jobs being lost, things being more expensive. And we really have a convergence that is really the most trying and most challenging for us as San Diegans, as us at City Hall, trying to make sense of this all going forward. So that's where it's going to be very difficult. And we're hoping that we can get through the next year relatively unscathed, and that we really prepare ourselves to be able to easily bounce back once we discover new revenue, once the economy looks more stable and more certain.
You took on the role of council president knowing that this could be an excruciating budget season.
Right.
Why did you undertake that challenge, and what went through your head when the reality of this all settled in?
Well, I thought this was a good opportunity for me. One, doors only open so often, so you've got to walk through them when the door is open. But my years of working with multiple groups through challenging conversations I thought would play well. My background is in engineering and very much of a problem solver, very pragmatic going forward. And to a certain degree, a lot of these cuts will not impact my district, District 1, as much as it will impact. So I could provide a better oversight of the entire process going forward, allowing my council colleagues to really drill in. How does this impact their individual neighborhoods? How does this impact those traditionally under-resourced, our lower income residents of San Diegans, and really focus on that and then be able to bring it all together come June when we got to actually adopt a budget.
Why is the impact on your district more negligible?
Generally speaking, my residents have better options to be able to overcome some of the cuts that we're seeing here going forward. Look, they are good tax-paying residents. They deserve city services as much as any other district going forward. But in a tough year, when we try to figure out who can accommodate the cuts, who can withstand them, that's the conversation that we're going to be having over the next few weeks.
On that note, how do you make sure that the cuts are equitable?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we've pivoted over the past few years as a city as a whole, to really understand that for decades, City Hall wasn't really particularly concerned about who got hurt, who got helped by those cuts, about how to try to, those communities that were historically disadvantaged. We're much more sensitive to that, while realizing taxpayers across the city deserve the services that they're being asked to pay for. But we're much more sensitive to make sure that let's put the money when we don't have enough funds where we can really have the greatest impact. And that's something that I came into office to be able to do, to recognize that that's the challenge really in front of us. So it's a delicate balance that we have to navigate going forward. So when we talk about cuts to libraries, is one community more impacted than other communities? And to also realize the rhetoric of it's just about south of 94, it's just about south of 8. We have some communities that are challenged across the entire city, and we got to make sure that we're really very thoughtful in those conversations.
Did the city do enough to prepare for this eventuality? I'm especially thinking about those record high pension payouts.
Yeah, I think the honest answer is no. We knew that we had a structural deficit. We knew that we rode on the COVID relief funds and other federal funds that came to us that would not be around forever. And so that's one of the reasons that some of these cuts are a little more dramatic in this upcoming year, because all those one-time funds are not going to be available to us. So we really have to make do on the revenue that is actually coming into the city. And no one likes to make those cuts, right? We want to keep our libraries, our rec centers. We want to deliver the services. We want to make sure that public safety is strong and has all those resources. But this is the year that we really have to face up and make those hard choices.
The mayor's proposed budget relies on tens of millions of dollars in new revenue, but that new revenue could still face some obstacles. So what happens if it doesn't pull through?
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge in front of us. There's a lot of folks who don't like the cuts that came out on April 15th. We're going to get an update here in a couple of weeks, the so-called May revise, that will also include projections of revenue that is dependent on the strength of the economy. And those signs are not very good. We expect sales tax maybe to be lower. We expect higher costs due to the tariffs going forward. And so we may see a slightly different version coming from the mayor here in a couple of weeks once we have that input. To your point, there's a couple of things that actually require council vote. We're talking about changing about how we charge for parking in public spaces. We talk about the trash fee, which is probably the most controversial in all of that. Those are big dollars that this budget really relies on to deliver. And so if we don't have that revenue, the conversations come June are going to be very challenging. There's going to be a lot of midnight oil being burned to balance that. And then if my council colleagues reject some of those cuts and say, I want to claw that back, how are you going to replace them? Because for every dollar you want put back in the budget, you've got to take another dollar out. So it's going to be a very tough conversation. But this is the balance between the mayor who looks at citywide and the big picture, council members who look at their district and their constituents, and the people who live, work, and play in their district. How do you balance that all out? And that'll be the conversation.
Whether we're talking about new revenue or cuts, there are always going to be naysayers, right?
Right.
At what point do you just have to tune them out and say, this is what we have to do for the city going forward?
Well, that's exactly, I think, what the job of the elected official is. For every cut, there's going to be a stakeholder or a contingency that's going to come in and say, not this cut, cut somebody else. And that's what our job is, to really balance those conversations. And this is going to be a year where we're going to say, we just have to stand up there and say, no, we can't restore those cuts because there just isn't the funding to cover and meet everybody's hope for and expectation.
People at home say, well, I've balanced my family's budget. Why can't the city do that? These are my elected officials. What do you say to them?
It is a big challenge. Part of it is we have mandates that we have to deliver, and so we need those core services. Public safety, which is a priority number one at the city, takes up over half our budget. So we start with that. While there's a little bit of refinement in those, by and large, public safety is being delivered at the rate that our police chief, our fire chief, and our lifeguard chief want us to deliver at. So then it's the rest of it. And then we have mandates that come from the state, come from the federal government, that we also have to deliver on. And then we talk about what we have to deliver on, what we'd like to deliver on, and that's the conversation. And of course, costs have gone up higher than the revenue that we rely on to pay for those services.
This all sounds very solemn, very challenging. Yeah. Is there any hope coming out of this budget season for closing that structural deficit?
Well, we already know that the goal originally was to come out of this and eliminate the structural deficit, measure ongoing revenue with ongoing expenses. And by and large, the draft that we've seen so far, which will be subject to change, pretty much does that. It's not 100%. So
for just this year or looking forward?
This year and looking forward, depending on the economy. That'll be the wild card in this conversation. But there are some one-time fixes. They're relatively small compared to previous years. So I think we've done, the mayor has done a good first draft, more conversations to come.